the kind of sense of being at home in the world that Levin feels that he's lost. It's about the kind of person he now feels that he is. And I want to talk a little bit about both of these in order. And I'm going to suggest that there is a positive answer. So this is a happy story that I'm going to try to tell you. It's a story that I firmly and profoundly believe in. And it's a story of how you can live after faith. So let's start with the idea of guidance. Many people feel that they need a religion to dictate to them the kinds of moral principles that they ought to follow. Now, like many philosophers, I think this is a profound mistake. It was a mistake, actually, that was pointed out more than 2,000 years ago by one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Plato. Plato suggests that a deity cannot be the source of the moral good. A deity cannot be, as it were, what determines what's right and what's wrong. And his character Socrates in the dialogue argues essentially this: if there isn't something independent of God to which God responds, if it's just the case that God's willing something makes it the right thing to do or the right way to be, then that's purely arbitrary. Goodness can't be like that. So there must be something independent of God, and if God is good, God recognizes that, and perhaps in scriptures of some kind relays it to us. But God cannot be himself or herself the source of goodness. Now, that's an intricate argument, and I don't want to go into it. I want to go in for a much more simple version that was given by another great philosopher, Immanuel Kant, about 2,000 years, or actually more than 2,000 years after Plato wrote his dialogue, the Euthyphro, in which the little argument I've just given you occurs. So Kant says in his attempt to give an account of morality and what we should do and what the foundation of morality is, he says, look, if you think you can just turn to a scriptural text and read off morality from it, think again, because we should only trust a text of that kind if we're convinced that the author is good. And in order to do that, we must have some independent standard by which we can recognize the author as being good. Kant says that in order to trust the New Testament, say, and I will quote his phrase, we must first be able to recognize the Holy One of Israel as a pattern for our conduct. Now, if you think for a moment, and perhaps this is less true in England than it is in the United States, in the country in which I've spent most of my life, there are people who believe in unquestioning obedience to the Bible. This is mainly a Christian phenomenon, although there are counterparts to this in Judaism, in Islam, and I suspect in Hinduism and in Buddhism. So the idea is that moral guidance comes from a text. Now, it's pretty clear, and it should be pretty clear to everybody, that all of these texts, but perhaps especially the Christian Bible, recommend on occasion some absolutely appalling things. They recommend sexual slavery. They recommend, murdering all sorts of people. They recommend enslaving people. They recommend infinitely awful eternal punishment for those who don't happen to recognize the deity who's supposed to run the whole show. Now, these are truly awful prescriptions. And wiser Christians do what Kant recommended. They stand back and they say, hey, before I start following these commands, I have to figure out independently what's right and what's wrong. And the very best movements within Christianity, within Islam, within Judaism, within Hinduism, within Buddhism, are all humanistic in character. Now, I want you to hang on to that idea, because it seems to me that the foundation of morality and our sense that particular kinds of principles are right and wrong lies in a humanist commitment, in a sense of doing things that benefit and advance the lives of other people and avoiding doing things that interfere with the lives of other people. That is, I think, the true foundation for morality. It's recognizing the intrinsic worth of other people and orienting our conduct according to that. And so in making our moral decisions, we have to look and try to understand how what we do would affect people. We have to try to sympathize with others, to think ourselves into other people's shoes, to try to find ways of acting so that we can do good for them, and indeed do so as broadly and as sympathetically as possible. So humanism, I think, lies at the core of the very best elements in religion. And I shall come back to this point later on, because I want to suggest that once you realize that that is the core, there's a natural alliance that cuts across all kinds of faith and binds together people, whether they are religious believers or not religious at all. I'm going to suggest that we redraw the map, redraw the geography that figures so largely in our disputes about matters of religion. Okay, now that suggests a kind of humanist core for moral guidance, for the guidance of action. But I want to say that the same thing occurs when we move into the sphere of trying to make sense of our lives. I think the religious person will sometimes say, well, my life makes sense because I'm serving God here on earth and I'll go to some afterlife later on. That seems to me a very shoddy and cheap way of thinking about things, as if you were taking God's exam, and then if you were lucky, you'd pass and get rewarded with some sort of eternal bliss in the hereafter. I think a much better idea, again, the better strands in religion have the idea of our lives on earth becoming meaningful, not necessarily through the services we render in church or in the synagogue or in the mosque or wherever, but through the things that we do for other people. So instead of thinking in terms of a large cosmic project that God has set in motion, they lower their sights and think in terms of human beings and the long history of our species. We're old, but we've still got quite a life in front of us as a species yet. We're only sort of about halfway through the average species life. And all of us, generation after generation, do things for other people. Sometimes we do things that interfere with other people. But if our lives are worthwhile, they're worthwhile because in small ways, because most of us make a difference in small ways, we advance the total human project through the things that we do that have positive impacts on other people's lives. That's the second sort of humanist core idea. So humanism is a moral compass through trying to engage sympathetically with other human beings and trying to help them pursue their own lives in their own way. We achieve a moral compass, something that directs us. And through trying to contribute to those lives, we also do something that makes sense. There's something we belong to, a human community that's larger than each of us as individuals. And if you like to think about it this way, our lives make differences through the things that we do to help that human community move forward. It's sometimes done in very dramatic ways. Perhaps it was done in a very dramatic way by Jesus. It was certainly done in a very dramatic way by Gandhi, and it was certainly done in a very dramatic way by Martin Luther King. In all of these cases, you can see a truly large and positive impact on the lives of other people. Most of us won't have the opportunity to do that, but we nurture children. We take care of people around us who are suffering or in economic need. We try to teach people things. We try to help them along in their way. And in doing that, we try to make the world, the human world, a richer and a better place. So the religious believer thinks in terms of this very large cosmic project that descends to us from God, to which the faithful people contribute. But they contribute here on earth not through some kind of worship or adoration of God. God doesn't need that. The only God worth worshipping is one who isn't a narcissist and who thinks that we should be more concerned with one another than we are with him or with her. If there is a God worth worshipping, and of course I don't believe that there is, the only such God would be one who took the humanist project very seriously. And I think all of the best forms of religion recognize that. And they all have within them something like the second commandment, which is a vague and imprecise expression of the kind of humanist attitude I'm recommending. But where they go wrong is in making that the second commandment. It should be the first, and really the only one, because it is the only important one. So I want to end. I want to allow lots of time so that you can pose questions, because this is always much better when we have a dialogue about things. But I want to end by suggesting, as I did earlier, that what we need to do is redraw the geography of these disputes. And here's why. I don't know how bad things are with really sort of literalist, fundamentalist, jingoistic, bigoted religion in England, but I can assure you that they're very bad in the United States. I mean, there are all sorts of people who call themselves Christians in the country in which I live, who are in complete violation of all the things that are most insightful in the Christian scriptures. You know, who want us to separate migrant families from their children, who want to deprive certain members of the population of the right to vote, who want to be able to wield guns anywhere and everywhere, who want to have taboos against gays and lesbians and transsexuals and so on and on and on and on. This is trash religion at its worst. And it's very bad indeed. And the people who subscribe to it are usually highly self-interested, and they don't filter out the bad bits of the scriptures. They, as it were, gravitate to some of the worst bits. So that's one side. But then on the other side, there seems to me a movement that's equally dangerous and equally wrong-headed. And that's really the militant atheist movement, the movement that says, let's get rid of all this trash about flying spaghetti monsters and all the rest of it. Get rid of it as quickly as possible. It's terrible that these people believe false things. I suspect that all of you know that the worst thing that can happen to a person is not believing something that's entirely incorrect about a transcendent being, a deity. The worst things that can happen to people are being unjustly persecuted, enslaved, violently attacked, and so on and so forth. Losing the ones they love, losing their children, seeing no prospects for their children. And all of those things are, of course, the targets of a humanist ethic. Now, what I find so distressing about the fundamentalist atheists who want to sweep it all away and replace it with nothing is that they ignore all of the ways in which humanism, practiced across the spectrum, is important in the lives of many, many people. So I want to end up by suggesting that a humanist alliance. There's been, in all the great religions of the world, a progression. Some of them have attained a stage where they tolerate members of other faiths, or as Barack Obama memorably said on his first inauguration, or of no faith. They don't believe that these people are evil. They don't believe that they are going to suffer eternal damnation. They don't believe that they should be persecuted on earth. Rather, they see them as fellow citizens, fellow human beings, fellow strugglers to try to make human lives go better, fully better. And when that attitude occurs, it seems to me that humanists who do not believe in the deity and the religious people who have a firm commitment to humanity first ought to combine forces. They ought to see themselves as differing on something that is, at the end of the day, relatively unimportant. What's really important is how we help, how we aid, how we advance the lives of other people. That's the center of the moral compass. It's also the center of what gives us a sense of living well. And if you want to say with a religious believer, and we should help one another and we should be committed to this because we are all, in a certain sense, children of a great father, a deity who watches over us. That's an add-on. We don't need that add-on. But I'm not going to get excited when I come across people who do. I'm not going to say, you're not my allies, because the people who matter are the people like Martin Luther King, like Gandhi, moved by a profound sense of how people suffer and with a profound conviction that they want to relieve that suffering. And so what I'm suggesting is that at the extremes, we've got two extraordinarily bad, morally bad, ethically bad, spiritually bad extremes. You know, it's all trash, let's get rid of it and celebrate Darwin or whatever, of the extreme atheists, and this extraordinarily bigoted, prejudiced, biased attitude that comes out of fundamentalist religion, which I've called trash religion rather unkindly this afternoon. What's important is that there are a lot of people in the world, I think, who can be persuaded to join a humanist movement. And at the end of the day, it's successful participation in that movement that is going to give lives meaning and give us moral direction. So I would love to have been in the pub back in the day when Lola and her friends got together. And I would love to have been part of that conversation. But I think the success that Lola wants to see will come through building a nexus of relationships in which what I like to call the human project is firmly at the center. It won't come by jumping up and down and saying, yeah, God, it's an irrational belief, let's get rid of it. It will come simply by committing ourselves to one another as human beings, working for justice, working for equality, working to relieve suffering. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kitcher. That is so touching.
Is that Clive? Is that Clive?
No, this is Lola.
Oh, okay. I wonder whether Clive had suddenly found a voice.
I am his voice today. Sorry. Professor, we learned our lesson quickly, and this is one of the reasons that we wanted to hear from you, because this is the direction we believe that we should be going and that any little thing that we can do, it will contribute to the future that we want, especially in the Black community and Africa. So I will now go through some of the questions in the chat. Derek says is it unfortunate that we can't reduce humanist morality to simple commands?
Good question. I think morality, people who try to reduce morality to simple commands are making a huge mistake. Yes, you can have a large, vague statement. Look, I mean, I think perfectly good, large, vague statement is the second formulation of Kant's categorical imperative. Always treat humanity in yourself and in others as an end and never as a real means. That's pretty good as a general statement, but it's woefully lacking in precision when you try to make a concrete ethical decision about whether, say, for example, in a particular school, you should be expending more resources on children who've had serious developmental problems or whose parents have had serious economic problems, or on children who are getting frustrated because the teaching isn't going fast enough. I mean, the sorts of concrete questions that come up for us all the time, as John Dewey pointed out wonderfully about 100 years ago, aren't usually about what's good and what's bad. They're about choosing among different kinds of goods. And formulas like Kant's or the second commandment or the utilitarian commandment don't help us with this. So actually what we need is a very particularistic commitment. And I'd put it this way: don't think in terms of a commandment, think in terms of a procedure. So when you are required to act on something, think about how your actions will affect people. Try to think yourself into the positions of all those people and how they would understand your actions and how they would be assisted or hurt by what you did. And then try to figure out how, if all of these people were talking to one another, and were talking to one another, I like Lola's word, in a rational fashion and making use of the best information, how they would try to reach a situation that everybody could at least live with. That's the right way to think about morality, to think in terms of a certain kind of collective working out of the difficulties that we face when we find that there are actions that affect different people very differently. And so, I think it's much better to think of morality in terms of ways of thinking and skills at becoming sensitive to other human beings than in terms of a single commandment. So I don't think it's a pity, because I think that, as I said at the beginning, any simple commandment would be completely inadequate.
And Jacob asks, says, I have seen hate and violence being used as a tool for social change. It is justified saying that you have to crack, I think it means to say, is it justified saying that you have to crack a few eggs to make an omelette? Is hate or violence ever justified?
Okay, so I think there's no doubt that the historical generalization is correct, that in the past, all of the great revolutions in morality, all of the great social advances have depended on people making enormous sacrifices. I mean, if you look at the abolition movement, that's certainly true. If you look at the movement for the expansion of opportunities for women, that is certainly true. People's lives have been ruined. in the biggest revolution I've seen in my lifetime, the diminishing of homophobia. I like to put it that way. It's not a revolution that's still complete. In that revolution, you've seen all sorts of pain and suffering taken on by people who have worked to move our societies forward. All of this is true. But even though we might think that the violence and the protests is entirely justified, I also believe that we should work to try to make, as it were, the societies in which we live be ones in which advances can be made less violently. I'll again quote Dewey. I would like to make our moral progress as human beings more systematic and sure-footed than it has traditionally and historically been. And like Dewey, I think that can be done. I think there can be institutions which we introduce into our society. I think there can be ways of educating people, of breeding the kind of sensitivity to others from very early in life that will not perhaps eliminate the need for violence and in protest, but will make the world a place in which moral progress can go forward with very much less of it. I'm hoping that we can start to make our omelets with by cracking fewer eggs, if you want to use that metaphor. It's a very good metaphor. I have a book that will come out later this year called Moral Progress, and another book that will come out later this year on education. And in both of those, I try to talk about ways in which we might do better with respect to this. Some of my commentators on the first book, Moral Progress, started off as a set of lectures, and I had some commentators who made exactly the point that was made in this question, that historically we've seemed to have needed a lot of violence. I believe that we can at least take steps to diminish the amount of violence that is necessary and diminish the amount of suffering that goes on during the process of positive social change.
Thank you. David Walter, he asks, isn't the issue that secular humanism is part of a paradox in that it does originate from the legacy of the Reformation and the Enlightenment, militant, and then full stop, militant atheism, bear with me, please. Militant atheism is the conservative form of secular humanist movement, same as it was during the Enlightenment. I'm not a philosopher, but surely we must confront the historical legacy of the Protestant backlash against the authority of the church and the conduit of empire that allowed the concept of secular humanism to thrive around the world.
It's really interesting. It's really a question about all sorts of historical processes. It doesn't seem to me so clear that secular humanism is necessarily an outgrowth of Protestantism. It doesn't seem clear to me that it's necessarily an outgrowth of any religion. I do think, in general, so I'm in sympathy with what I think is behind part of what the question has said. I do think that, in principle, we always have to be aware that in going forward, we may take over some of the structures of the past that may get in the way of the efforts that we're trying to make. So, for example, I believe that the people who say there is, for all that's been done to confront problems of racism, for all that's been done to confront problems of sexism, there are still structural features that we have taken over from the past that as it were, remain in place and make the eradication of the prejudices impossible. So I do think attention is needed to the historical legacy, but I'm not quite sure how that would turn out in the case at hand. I was interested by what was said about militant atheism being the conservative version of it. I think there is something profoundly conservative about militant atheism. It sees the problem in terms of, well, let's think of it in terms of a medical analogy. There's a body and it has a growth inside it, and the growth causes harm, and we've just got to cut it out and everything will be all right. It seems to me the right analogy is that whatever is there that the militant atheists want to remove is also connected to various kinds of life functions. And what we have to do in our surgery is be very careful that those get preserved as we make the advance. And that's why I think a positive version of secular humanism is so important.
Thank you, Professor. Marinella says, I have found it hard to come up with something positive to say when people say their self-destructive behavior is a direct consequence of their loss of faith. Sorry. I lost that. I'll find it.
So is the question perhaps, so what can be said to these people?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I have found it. Oh gosh, I keep losing it.
I found it hard to come up with something positive to say to people. Their self-destructive behavior is a direct consequence of their loss of faith. I just don't know, what to, gone again. I just don't know what to say.
Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit mealy-mouthed about this. So the first thing, it seems to me, that needs to be done when you're dealing with somebody who's engaged in self-destructive behavior is to try to find ways of preventing the self-destructive.
Sorry, I'm going to just interrupt. He also says, I just don't care about anything and anything anymore. Being a typical statement. Has anyone here ever felt that way? So it's about that feeling that they just don't care anymore. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So I mean, look, I could just go back to some things I said during the talk and say, try to focus the people on ways in which they can contribute to the lives of other people, to see themselves as part of something that gives their lives more sense. But in some of the cases, I'm sure that's going to be very difficult. I'm sure that what you're dealing with in some of these cases are people who, for whom their environment in which they've grown up has not given them anything of this kind at all. And now they have to rebuild it anew. And that's why it's actually important to have, I think, not just a single person who's observing them, but a whole community that can welcome them in and support them, and perhaps give them a completely fresh start. I think the attraction of religion for some people, and I live just south of some relatively poor parts of New York. I think the attraction of religion for some people in these parts of New York is that it's a lifeline, and you take away the lifeline and they have nothing left. The only way of responding to that is to throw them a new lifeline and haul them in and make them whole again. And that requires more than the kinds of words that I've uttered about, the importance of the human project. It means giving them the opportunity to find their own distinctive talents, to find their own distinctive ways of contributing to the lives of other people. And that will vary enormously from case to case. But the first thing you need to do, it seems to me in these cases, is not to worry about the intellectual side of things, but to rescue them.
Thank you. And Philip says, do you think we make a mistake in assuming that those who live religion do so for the same reason? For example, prescriptive moral code or the promise of an afterlife. If we don't, the implication seems to be that what humanism gives back is going to be different from differently motivated by those who defect from realized belief.
Okay, so this is I think often seen as a great big stumbling block. I'm in it for the afterlife. That's why I do all the things I do. I obey God's commands. Well, I've got an afterlife coming at the end of it, and that's what I really want. I guess there may be people who have that attitude, but actually, I think most people probably don't. But for those who do, it seems to me that the concept of this afterlife has to be probed. So I want to do this in two ways. I mean, sometimes, and for people I know who are really religious, this is a very big deal. Sometimes the appeal of the afterlife lies in the sort of reunion with loved ones who have been lost. I know a very brilliant and also very devout man who wants more than anything else to meet his wife in the hereafter. I think he's confused. I think what he really wants is impossible. It's the continuation of the life that he had with his wife before she died. I mean, what is this afterlife in which, as it were, we get restored with our loved ones? That doesn't take away the pain of the way in which our relationship with them was truncated. It doesn't take away the pain caused by the fact that they couldn't do all sorts of things that they wanted, or in the case of young people, develop in the ways that they'd planned. So, I think this is, when probed, a very serious difficulty. And the next thing to say is, well, look, why should one think that the afterlife, designed by a deity who insists that you pay excessive homage to him or to her, is really going to be worth having? Look, think about it for a moment. There are two possibilities. Either everybody gets it, or only those who have been, as it were, devoted followers get it. Now, if it's the latter, I want to say this deity is a colossal narcissist. This deity is really, insisting on worship as a precondition, having given, I may say, incredibly mixed messages along the way about his or her existence and what he or she wants human beings to do. A deity like that seems to me not to be trusted with organizing a wonderful afterlife for us. So, I think if there's going to be a satisfactory afterlife, we're all up for it. And there probably isn't. In fact, there almost certainly isn't. I would even say there certainly isn't. But if it turns out by some fluke that there is, well, I expect to be able to participate in it. Because I think if it's worth having, then any sensible deity would say, yeah, I know you didn't go to church. I know you didn't believe in me. I know you even tried to talk other people out of believing in me. But nonetheless, you know, you tried to do some things for other people. You tried to nurture people. You tried to look after them. That's what counts. So come on in. You're fine. So I think that's the right attitude to take to the afterlife. Put it under the microscope for a moment and see what it looks like.
Yeah, Professor, I wish the religious mind can accept that, because they will feel cheated if we don't go to hell. For all the energy they put into God, you know, for the promises, and for those who have not done so, they will feel really cheated. I think they really want us in hell.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is this strand, and it's especially prominent in what I call trash religion, that it isn't good enough for you to be in heaven, in bliss with the Almighty. You got to see the other people down there getting really tortured at the same time. And I think, you know, I don't want any part of worshiping a God who does that sort of thing. I mean, you know, if it turns out that there is an extremely powerful and malign being who has set up the universe on that sort of standard, I still don't want any part of it, and neither should a religious person. I mean, if you know, there's something really kinky about the desire to see the souls of the damned writhing in torment. I think this is the sort of thing that I suspect, I hope, the very few people who believe in this ought to talk themselves out of it.
And the last questions, I'm going to, there are two questions. I will just say the two. One is from Joe and the other from Katia. So Joe asks, what do you think the role of education is in relation to humanism, so that people realize that there is a positive alternative to religion? And then Katia says, finding like-minded people across the belief or non-belief, separation is a luxury to some. Some are trapped in an oppressive belief. Is it okay to be militant in freeing children, for instance, from being brainwashed?
Okay, they're both good questions. So education. It seems to me that education ought to start very early with something that's, I think, just terribly simple. And that is having children work things out together. I think moral development isn't a matter of teaching people principles. It's a matter of teaching them how to identify with one another, how to recognize one another's needs and respond to those needs. So I would start with, you know, having joint planning in kindergarten or nursery school and on up. And as I go on, I would make the groups more diverse, so that the finding sensible and workable plans becomes more difficult. Okay, so that's a way of fostering a certain kind of moral basis. And then I think at some point in education, you need to take a look at the histories of the various religions and of the various secular movements. And these have to be appraised in discussions among like-minded, you know, among people with diverse views, the children in the classroom. And they have to be assessed for their moral character. And so, I mean, I think it's really, really important for a certain kind of religious education to be there, not one that actually teaches any particular religion or sees any particular religion as primary, but rather one that understands the phenomenon of religion and how various religions relate to moral action and to try to understand them for their good sides and their bad sides. And I think that's really important. Now, militancy and brainwashing. I'm definitely against brainwashing. I think education really does have to be a matter of listening to the growing child and attuning what is given to how that child is developing, and constantly trying to allow that child to find a range of options, not insisting on some straitjacket into which the child should be forced. And I would hope that as time goes on, I mean, the question started, if I recall it correctly, with the difficulty, I think it was described as a luxury, of forging links across religious boundaries. I don't think that's impossible. I think that with the right kind of educational basis and with the right kinds of social institutions, people who are really committed to humanism can find one another and can work together. I mean, I think we see this with interfaith responses sometimes to crises and difficulties. And I would really, really like to see secular humanists be part of that and be a welcome part of that. They are in some cities, and I agree with the questioner who said it's a bit of a luxury, because these things tend to be available for people who aren't suffering or subject to so many economic and social pressures. So I think a more egalitarian society would also help us to forge these alliances across the boundaries. So thank you very much for your questions, all of you.
Thank you so much, Professor. We can't thank you enough.
Sure you can, you just have.
I want to ask on behalf of Association of Black Humanists, if we can see you again, when your new book is released, if you can come back to, that is just something so warm, so sweet, so like a pastor.
No. Well, when I was a boy in the Church of England, I have to confess, I did come across some really remarkable people who were doing a lot of good in the community. Of course, those were the days when there were bishops of the Church of England who said, we've got to get beyond looking at God as an old man with a big white beard who sits up in the sky. Religion is really about personal relationships. I think that really made a great impact on me. So, yeah.
Yeah, why not? Why can't we have sweet, warm voices in humanism? Why does it have to be just banging people's head about who amongst us is not guilty of having our non-rational side? And especially for those of us from Africa, we know why religion is the solace. We don't have a rational backup system. We don't have NHS. We don't have welfare. The only thing that people seem to have is this God that doesn't exist. That is the sadness of it. That is the sadness of it. So thank you.
I will be delighted to come back if you would like me to come back. I mean, I've enjoyed very much talking to you, and I believe strongly in this movement, and I hope it will flourish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And that is it from us today. Everyone, have a lovely evening, and thank you for your presence today.
Thank you, Lola.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for your joining. Next time I'll have some music for you. We can do a little dancing before we start. Professor Kitchener, thank you so much for your
if you tell me what song you'd like me to sing, I am actually a singer, so
go ahead, whatever.
I'll sing when I come back.
Okay, that's a deal. We'll hold you to that. We'll hold you to that. Thank you, everyone, for your support today. Please make a donation if you'd like to see us still here. It is just Lola, Clive, and I doing our thing. We want to get more people in. We want to have bigger debates. We want you to participate. If you've got an idea, send it to us. We're always willing to and open to ideas and thoughts. And we are trying to get bigger